So, welcome. Today is a day of serious topics, and I wanted to start with some quotes from Linda McMahon's testimony, which was February 13th for her confirmation to be our new Secretary of Education. And I even printed these out so I can be accurate with what she said. So here are some of her statements that she testified to. It's not the president's goal to defund the programs. It's only to have it operate more efficiently. IDEA funding would continue and might be placed under a different agency, Health and Human Services, but not cut. Now, this is one of my favorite statements. She says, I'm pulling together ideas for better managing special education funding, emphasizing the need for efficiency, flexibility, and improved state access. I just love how she's pulling together ideas. So the next statement really caught my eye also. She said that she was talking about how it's important for people to listen to parents, not politicians. I figure that's our invitation to call Linda McMahon and give her our input, right? There's a little bit more to that story, and I'll tell you that later. But I want you to stay tuned because, as I said, we have some serious topics to talk about today, and we have the perfect guest to do it. So stay tuned, and we will. So, welcome if you're watching live or on the replay. If you are new to our show, I'm Charmaine Tanner. I'm a parent of an adult son, Dylan, who has Down syndrome. I'm a retired teacher and an advocate for families. So, I thought it would be helpful for us to start with a little bit of a grounding exercise. I don't know about you, but this is like a very stressful time, and not just stress, but really the anxiety, right? Because we just don't know what's going to happen next. So, what I'd like you to do is just take a few minutes with me and start by putting your hands on your heart. And what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 deep breaths and exhale. And on the first breath, I want you to say, I am safe. And I want you to exhale the fear. On the second breath, I want you to say, my child is safe. And exhale the anxiety. So do it with me. Put your hands on your heart. Take a deep breath and say, I am safe. And exhale the fear. Take another deep breath and say, my child is safe. And exhale the anxiety. Now, if you're like me, you probably still feel this tightness in your chest or your stomach or your heart pounding. And I want you to know that we have to have ways to hang on to hope. So for me, it could be meditation and breathing. For you, it might be something else. Is it a prayer that you say? Is it a gratitude journal? Do you do meditation or things like tapping? So let us know in the comments, how do you hang on to hope? Is it venting to your best friend? Because the tip that you share about how you hang on to hope today is a tip that might help the next parent. So put these tips in your comments And while you're doing that, I'm going to welcome our special guests for today because we are so lucky. We have Sue Swenson with us. And Sue had been a guest on my show in the past. And I remember one of the things that Sue and I talked about was change. And what are the ingredients that we need for change? And how do we influence change and become part of that so we're proactive and not always in this reactive mode? And so, when we're talking today, I want you to understand and realize the tremendous abilities that Sue Swenson has to be a change maker, to be a change agent. And if you aren't familiar with Sue, she is a mover and a shaker in the human rights and inclusion world. She has been appointed to disability leadership positions by 3 different presidents. She was a former acting secretary of OSERS in the Department of Education, and she's also the president of Inclusion International. So I thought Sue would be a perfect person because her insights are deep and they cause us to stop, think, and go through some steps of knowing this is something that we can have an impact on. We can be part of the change. Sue, welcome.
Thank you, Charmaine.
I'm so glad you're here. And I had talked to Sue before we had come live, and I said, in all the advertising of Sue being our guest today, I never mentioned an important hat and a role that she's had, and that is being the mother of 3 sons. I thought, Sue, it would be helpful if
Sure.
you could talk a bit about your family and
Yep.
your journey.
Be happy to, Charmaine. My husband and I had 3 boys, all born, one in Illinois and 2 in Minnesota. My middle son, Charlie, had extremely complex disabilities from birth. Charlie didn't walk, he didn't talk, he didn't toilet himself, he didn't feed himself. His support needs were pretty high support needs. He was also a charming, friendly, wonderful person who was included full time in school starting in 2nd grade. Again, Charlie was born in 1982. Things were a little bit easier for me in the 80s and 90s than they are for parents now because schools are so much more lawyered up than they were when I was going through. Charlie basically achieved full inclusion for himself. I asked for 5 minutes of inclusion after lunch for him to come down to a 2nd grade classroom from the segregated disability classroom because I knew the teacher. My older son had her, and she called me up after 2 weeks and said, "Sue, I need a favor." And I said, "Oh, I was thinking, I'm a mom." I thought, geez, you couldn't handle 5 minutes of story time. And she said, "No, I need a favor. The kids don't want him to go back to that little room. They think it's sad. Would it be okay with you if he stayed with us all afternoon?" And so I said, "As a favor to you, he can stay all afternoon." And then 2 weeks later, she called me and said the kids had decided that they do science in the morning and they thought Charlie would really enjoy science. Now, Charlie was legally blind also. So doing science meant he had to be right in the front and right in all of it. It was the children who brought him into an inclusive classroom. And it was a teacher who was willing to see the impact. She was a veteran teacher. She was almost at the end of her career, and she told me it was her best year in teaching because having a child with disability in the class warmed the classroom. No matter who you were, no matter what your problems were, you could always help Charlie, and he was always grateful for it and friendly about it. And the kids were just helping each other. She had never seen anything like it. I have lived my life in public life and now in the international arena with a really strong belief that inclusion isn't just good for the disabled child, it's also good for everyone else. And teachers need to be included, and all of the other children need to be included. There were children in Charlie's classroom who had IEPs, but they weren't known as kids with disabilities because their IEPs were delivered carefully and quietly. I think once the next year, the whole school became inclusive
Huh.
and everybody's test scores went up, not just the disabled kids.
Yes.
Everybody's test scores went up. So there's something about inclusion that is the secret sauce, that is magic. And that has changed my approach to thinking about what advocacy is. When I
Huh.
started out in Partners in Policymaking, there were three main parts to the curriculum. One, learn what is best practice, not just in school, but in life for people with significant developmental disabilities. Two, learn how to do individual advocacy so that you can achieve the closest possible to best practice for your child. And three, move on to do systems advocacy, to think about how do we change systems so that everyone has access to what is good. And that's what I want to talk to you about a little bit here. I don't know if you've heard the sort of old, it's not really old, but there was a Clinton era saying from the White House, never waste a good crisis. And the idea is that when there's a crisis, when things are falling apart, somebody has to put it back together. And if you were at the table to put things back together, maybe you can make it better than it used to be. Now, I'm not a Pollyanna. I'm not telling you that this is a time where we should be thinking about going into Linda McMahon and saying, okay, here are the things we need to do. On the other hand, people were struggling with IDEA. I never got a phone call at the Department of Education saying, hey, everything's going so great. I think everything's working so well. And we as parents have been terrified of someone changing IDEA because it is a set of rules that help our children benefit from their civil rights under the American Constitution. I want to emphasize that. There's nothing that the Department of Education does, there's nothing in IDEA that, if they are gone, takes away the child's 14th Amendment right to equal protection under the law and an equal right to a free, appropriate public education. If any child has a free, appropriate public education, all children have to have a free, appropriate public education. So, why does IDA exist? If you talk to the people who put it together, it was because once we had the first court cases that established a right to education for all children, everybody realized if we didn't try to align the approaches that states were taking, it was going to be a free for all of litigation. And nobody wanted to spend all of the money on arguments and litigation and people arguing about what is free, appropriate public education and what is not. The Department of Education and IDEA were set up to fund and monitor states so that states could deliver funds to local districts, and local districts design what the education programs are, and IEP teams design what each child's individual education program is. That's the theory, right? Here's a couple of things that I think I would love to fix. Our laws, our approach to special education is compliance oriented. So, you as advocates, if you're lucky, you've been trained in what the law requires, and you've been trained how to demand that from your school, but it's a compliance oriented demand. You can't demand what isn't a lowest possible common denominator performance level. That's a problem. When the department goes in to measure whether the states are complying with the law, it tends to be very process driven. How many complaints were filed, how many commas were out of place, how many this, how many that, and not focused very much on hey, what the Government Performance and Results Act said is that we, as parents, as caregivers, as lovers and nurturers of our children, we should be delighted with government services. We should be able to say, this government service treated us with courtesy and respect. And are you ever asked that? When you finish the IEP, does your school ask you, hey, were you treated fairly? Were you treated with courtesy and respect? Do we have any numbers of that? Any measurements that go up to the federal level that say this state is doing really well and this state not so much? I would also like to see a change in how we manage the data for kids in special education. And I don't mean give the data to a bunch of Bitcoin bros. That is not the goal. But it would be possible for us to have data systems that would allow us as parents to not get regular reports of what's happening with our children, but to be able to see it in real time. So today, Charlie had this and this, and Charlie did this, and Charlie spent 20 minutes outside of the classroom doing his related services therapies, or he had the therapies in the classroom. Whatever those things are, we could be able to see those in real time. We could be able to see, the teacher could be able to see how does their inclusion of children with disabilities compare to other teachers in the system. The principal could be able to see how many complaints were there from parents in this period of time, how many children were taken out of the classroom environment. You know, in Medicaid, if a person is taken out of the Medicaid environment, you can't bill for that time. That you cannot be reimbursed for that time if they are not in an active treatment environment. Special ed, you can kick a kid out of class anytime and they don't lose any funding. That's a problem. And we don't even know when the kids are out of class. The parents know because you're getting that phone call saying, he's having a bad day. Can you come and pick him up? And I think we have to have a national action on that one that says, nope, can't pick him up. Sorry, he's yours. You have to figure it out. I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, guys. I cannot imagine the anxiety that people feel looking at the news every night and realizing that the brain trust in the Department of Education, in the Institute for Educational Sciences, the brain trust in all of the research programs that have been funded by that those people have lost their funding or they've lost their jobs. We rely on what they knew, and nobody is taking responsibility for getting rid of all of that knowledge. I don't think Elon Musk, I don't care how rich that little bugger is, he doesn't have enough money to make up for the losses that he has already incurred in the American public service systems. It's going to take a lot to put this back together, and that to me is the key. Okay, I'm a Democrat. The three presidents who appointed me, I worked for a Republican on the Hill. I worked for a Republican president for 6 months because he asked me to stay on for a little while. But I'm a Democrat. This is not coming from that. This is coming from being someone who sees Washington, D.C. and how it works, and who saw how it worked for me as a parent before I came in. And this is chaos and destruction. And it's meant to make you feel anxiety and misery. It's meant to make you feel disempowered, terrified, frightened. Find some way to hold on to your strength. You can't do it by yourself. Stress management is really important. You you have to do that if you need to stop drinking so much coffee, if you need to find people to talk to. When I was stressed out, I had friends that I went for a walk every Saturday morning in Minneapolis with There were four of us. We were all parents of kids with disabilities. Have people to talk to. Talk to about your stress. If you are worried because you also have multiple stresses, you are the parent of a child with a disability, and you also are undocumented in the United States, uh, I have nothing but empathy for you. I don't know where you find people to talk to. You must have a community, you must have people that you can be going over things with. Here's a couple of key points that I want to leave you with. One, this is a worldwide problem. So it's not just that the DOGE flying monkeys are threatening our research base and our services and the ability of our system to respond to us, to be responsive and courteous to us. That's not the only problem. They have yanked funding from USAID. George Bush designed AIDS clinics in the rest of the world. We know that every day there are probably now 300 children born with AIDS who would not have been born with AIDS if their parents, if their mothers had been allowed to continue their treatment. Out of those 300 babies, 100 will die before they're a year old. This is not a right to life administration. This was not a move to preserve life. This was not a move to recognize the importance of every child's life. This was a move to punish people who care about things like how are other people in the world treated. That's not the only thing that happened, but it is one of the grossest and most boneheaded moves that has been done. Many of our organizations in the disability field have lost a lot of funding. We have lost the ability to work on deinstitutionalization or self advocacy or improving special education around the world or making sure that people who have a child with a disability can raise that child and nurture that child and have some hope for that child's future and not think dark thoughts about what needs to happen to that child. This is a worldwide problem. Inclusion International works with the UN and with other international organizations on the human rights of people with intellectual disabilities and their families. I have been the president now. I'm coming up into my sixth year. I have 2 years left. We are a representative organization with elected officers from every region in the world. We have members in, I think, 118 countries. Probably 45 or 50 of those are very active. People come together in networks to try to help solve each other's problems with inclusive education, community living, all of the other things that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities sets out as aspirations for people with disabilities. Families are not included in the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities as a rights holder, but they are recognized in the preface as the key unit of society is the family. And families really matter. Now, that brings me to my second point. Charmaine's opening exercise, I am safe, my child is safe. Those are what we have to concentrate on. I know that you are getting pounded by information that everything is going to be yanked away. I don't think that's possible, but I didn't think it was possible that we would get to this place either. I can't predict what's going to happen. Geez, if I was able to do that, I would be making so much money right now. I can't even imagine what comes out of this chaos. I will read for you, though. I hope some of you are from Illinois. Governor J.B. Pritzker gave the State of the State I think it was yesterday, and it closed in this way: tyranny requires your fear and your silence and your compliance.
Hmm.
Democracy requires your courage. So gather your justice and humanity, and do not let the tragic spirit of despair overcome us when our country needs us the most. People with disabilities and their families have been a real core in the American democracy. Um, Most people don't know that Thomas Jefferson had a sister with uh, intellectual disabilities, and he had a brother who probably now would have been identified as being on the autism spectrum. He lived with his sister and brother his whole life. His sister died when he was an adult, just before he wrote, "We hold these truths to be self evident that all people are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." You can't tell me that his experience growing up with Elizabeth, she was only 2 years younger than he was, in any way not foundational to his work in the democracy. I think around the world, we see where there is strong democracy, people with disabilities have a chance to have social protections like our Social Security and Medicaid. They have a chance to have educational systems that work for them. When there is no democracy, when there is oligarchy or monarchy, it is much more difficult to achieve. Charity models become the only thing, and people are not respected as full human beings, which is our complete goal for all disabled people. Here's something you can do that's a real thing, and you can make a checklist for yourself, and you can talk to other people about it. And here's what I want to tell you: find a representative organization that represents the people that you care about. Not a professional organization necessarily. The ARC is a representative organization. It has members all over the country. They vote, they elect people, they make decisions about policy through political process. There are many other representative organizations. If you can't find one, make one.
Hmm.
That's harder than it seems, but in the olden days, the special ed advisory committee at school had some power because we represented parents of children with special education needs, and that that was really important. Keep your eye on the big democracy. So you have to spend some time following what's happening in your legislature. You have to spend some time following, this is key, in your school board. School board meetings are public meetings. You can attend them. They have to be, there has to be a notice that there will be a meeting, and you have to be allowed to attend. In many places now, you can attend by Zoom, which is a lot easier for parents of kids with disabilities sometimes. If you can be in the room, if you can introduce yourself as being from an organization, that is more powerful. You're not necessarily there to give testimony, although you might wish to. I certainly gave lots of testimony in various school boards over my time in Minnesota. But you can also be there just to observe, see what they talk about, see what they know and what they don't know. And if the school board members seem ignorant of what their responsibilities are to children with disabilities, that they're going to have a responsibility to fund everything that children with disabilities require under IDEA, whether the federal money is flowing to them or not, whether Medicaid to schools is cut or not. It's the state that's going to be holding the bag on that, and that's why you should also know what's happening in your legislature. This is why Having a membership in a representative organization is so important. And I don't mean just a lobbying organization, an organization that is democratic in its foundations. This is the time for us to, what do I want to say, exercise our democratic muscles. We have to, if you go to the gym to get stronger, that's great. What are you doing to exercise your democratic muscles? How are you getting connected to the democracy through representative organizations and also through your relationships with your legislators or your city council members or your school board members? They need to know, not here's where the rubber hits the road. I don't just want you to go to them and ask for what your child needs. Democracy is not transactional. This is not about, I need this for my kid and he needs this and here's my story. That's really important when you're in an IEP meeting. This is not IEP. You're going in to talk about what all children with disabilities need. And that's what you represent when you go in. I am the parent of a child with a disability. I'm not going to talk to you about his or her particular needs today, but I'm going to tell you that there are X number of children with disabilities in this school district, and here's what they need. And they have the right to these things under the law. And it's your responsibility as a school board or as a legislator or even as the city council to figure out how to deliver those things to these children. And if we allow the federal, the whole infrastructure of expertise to be pushed out the door, problem solving is not going to be very easy for the states. If I were a governor right now, I would be terrified. Medicaid and special ed are two very large parts of the state budget in most states. And if Trump starts talking about being willing to cut Medicaid after all of his promises in the campaign that he was going to hold it as precious, Medicaid is precious. Turns out it only took a month to convince him that he could cut it and it would be okay. Why? Because our laws allowed Elon Musk to worm his way into the campaign and give money and put ads on TV that got gullible people to vote for Trump. I'm sorry, that's true. It's true. And Trump owes him, and Trump will not hold him back. And Congress is also stuck because of the threat of Trump and Musk going in and challenging Republican members of Congress in their primaries. Now, if I were a Republican member of Congress, I'm sorry, but I would have more courage than that. I wouldn't want to be the member of Congress who sold out to the threat of rich guys trying to threaten my seat in the Congress. I would be willing to risk that. I would have courage to stand up and say, you know what? Sorry, I'm in now for the next 6 years, and here's what I'm going to do. And you can't do anything to me until I next run for election. Or this Congress is going to go on for the next 2 years. We are not going to be rolled over by a bunch of tech bros. It's just not going to happen. And Congress needs to stand up and do that and say that. And if they can't do it, they need to start telling the truth to each other. It's outrageous that they're rolling over and not standing up. And it is a Republican Congress right now. And that's the other thing you can do is work to change that. I told you I was a Democrat. If that ticks you off, I'm sorry. But you have to have a Congress that can stand up. That's the way our democracy works. The courts can only do what the courts can do. The administration is supposed to have expertise and knowledge and be able to manage the laws as they were written by Congress. And Congress has to protect the laws that it wrote. and it appropriated. The president is not supposed to be able to end the services that the Congress put in place. Congress did that and they appropriated funds for it. It's not up to the president to say, okay, I'll take one of those and not one of those, and one of those and not one of those. It's pure ignorance that makes these people think that they can do that. And ignorance can be loud and it can be insistent, and that's what's happening here. Now, a couple other things I want to tell you. Be careful where you get your information. The National Down Syndrome Congress website is an excellent source of information about what's happening. They have fact sheets about what happens if the Department of Education is unfunded or is moved to HHS. There are other websites that have tremendous information about Medicaid cuts in schools and how that threatens children and how it threatens the states. And be careful, though. Don't just allow yourself to fall into the fear mongering that is happening out there, because the fear mongering is designed to make you miserable. It's designed to make you dysfunctional. It's designed to make you discouraged and make you step back from having the courage to call a school board member or call a congressman or go into your principal and talk about what's going to happen. I think that discouragement is probably one of the key points here. And the other key point is when you start talking, you're just some dude who shows up in the departments and says, we're going to start cutting. But having news coverage for that, having all of this stuff covered as if it was real, it makes teachers and schools feel even less secure than they do now. Who's gonna want to be a teacher if they see that our schools are just a political football for weirdos? And these attacks make recruiting into education just that much harder. And of course, the Department of Education, of course, OSERS, is one of the places that funds professors of special education around the country so that we can train more special education teachers. So the idea is that just making these comments about the Department of Education, it hurts educators. And that's the part that can't be made up for. You can't go in. And right now in public education, there's about 120,000 job openings nationwide. That's a lot. And if we start just kicking around the Department of Education, what's going to happen to people wanting to go in? These guys aren't thinking about that. They don't understand that. They don't have enough knowledge to understand how these things are related. I have often thought Elon Musk may be the richest man in the world. He's also one of the stupidest. The moves that he's making are incredibly stupid. They are ill-informed. They are not thoughtful. He's not doing things in a way that is meant to design new stuff. Education, Jefferson said this too. Education is the key to our democracy. If we don't have an educated populace, then we are more at risk of having idiots promise us the rock candy mountain and we vote for it because we're not smart enough to see through it. So attacking education is part of the plan of building a democracy or building a government that only exists to create tax cuts for the super wealthy. And if he's so wealthy, why does he need a tax cut? For God's sake, how can you use billions and billions of dollars in your life? You can't possibly. It's not a human enterprise at that point. It's just a game. And So I'm sorry if I sound angry. Anger is better than fear. Anger is better than discouragement. Anger is better than backing away. Be in touch with your anger. Use your anger. Don't let your anger use you. Charmaine has given you a couple of tips about how to keep your anger from eating you up. The key way is talk to other people. You know, the way the parent movement was begun in the first place, people in towns just put ads in their local newspaper that said, if you have a child with an intellectual disability, they use the word mental retardation, please come to our home for coffee on this evening. And the first one that I heard about that did that, it was in the 60s, so I was still a child. I didn't know about it then. But they expected maybe 10 people to show up, and there were 50 or 60 people who showed up. You could go to your Facebook neighborhood group and say, hey, if you have a kid with a disability or with an IEP, why don't you come to a meeting at the public library, and be sure you reserve a room at the public library. And you can bring in some coffee if you want to be nice, but you don't have to. And start talking to people about what can you do in local action? What can you do to encourage each other? What can you do to stand together and to be strong? Because that's the key to democracy. We, the people, are strong. We, each person, we are weak. We can be pushed around. But all of us together can't be pushed around. You could meet at Starbucks if you really think it's a small group of people. They do meetings there. You could find a church basement if you really are getting to the point where you have 50 people. Find a church basement and bring in a speaker, bring in somebody from the school board and let them have 10 minutes to talk, and then have questions from the audience. This is all stuff that works. We know it works. You got to have courage for your kid. You got to. And it's not just about getting your kid the most. That's the thing that is hurting us, is this idea that somehow she who dies with the most services wins. We have to be thinking about everybody else, and we have to be thinking about how can we live simply so that others can simply live. I just think that's what feeds our soul, is recognizing that true advocacy is advocacy for everyone who's in our circumstance, empathy for everyone who has similar concerns. Identified as gay are deeply at risk in our schools right now in many states. Children who identify as transgender are even more at risk. In other parts of the world, people who identify in those ways are at risk of being killed. I don't think we have government programs that are going to round people up, but we certainly do have government programs that have started to make life miserable. Women who have birth control needs are being vilified. These are all things that we need to have empathy about, and that they are related to us, because what we are standing up for is not just people with disabilities, and it's not just children with disabilities. It's not just their families, it's vulnerable people. And what we see in opposition to us here is the powerful people trying to take over for their own good and for their own convenience and for their own enjoyment. The most disturbing thing I've heard out of Elon Musk wasn't even about all of this Doge nonsense. It was about one of his rocket ships recently. The last one, I think, that went up blew up as soon as it was launched. And he laughed in his response to it and said, we didn't really have time to learn anything, but it was amusing. So I immediately thought in that moment, this is a man who thinks blowing stuff up is fun. And that's what he's doing in our government right now. And that's why we can't allow it to keep happening. It's terrorism, is what it is. And I stand behind that. It is terrorism. Um, don't let yourself be terrorized by it. I hope you find ways to be together. I hope maybe on this Facebook page you can start sharing your stories of, hey, I met together with some people in my neighborhood and it was great and here's what happened. And maybe you can start sharing, I wrote a letter to my congressman and here's the draft, here's what I wrote to him and I heard back and it was great. And I asked for a meeting with Linda McMahon and there were 10 of us going to go in and here's what the office said to us. But if she is going to say, if she's going to be confirmed and she's going to say that she wants to hear from parents, then let her hear from parents. Let her hear from you. The other thing I wanted to say, though, there's something coming up in April that it's
Oh,
expensive.
yes.
If any of you can attend the disability policy seminar, you absolutely must. And let me explain what it is. It's all of the big representative organizations in DC who do lobbying on our key issues. This is not lobbying, it's an educational seminar. They will teach you what the key issues are so that you then can go to the Hill and meet with your congressional delegation, your congressmen and your senators, with a delegation of people from your state. So you'll go along with 10 or 15 or 20 people from your state and explain to them with fact sheets what the key points are and what the truth is about what's happening with our programs. Um, this has been a key part of disability policy. I went to my first one in 1987. It was a small meeting. There were maybe 30 people in the room. We didn't go to the Hill. We didn't have enough people to have delegations. But I did, in my time at the ARC, have a chance to fund it and encourage it. And I would encourage you, especially if you do have a way to contact people in your local school district or your local neighborhood. Maybe only one of you can afford to go, but maybe all of you can chip in. Maybe you could do a GoFundMe so that
Mm.
more people can go. It's only expensive because it's in Washington and you have to fly in and you have to find a hotel. And maybe there's a way to set up some couch surfing. Maybe there's a way to figure out some other ways to make it less expensive. But we have to start using social media to support our social goals. And I hope you can do that. I hope you find strength there. I hope you find love there. I hope you find people who care about you and care about your children. And I hope you realize that we can care about each other and care for each other. And that's not a Pollyanna kind of response. That's real. If only one of you can go to DPS, maybe they can do some live broadcasting from there, or going to the congressman's office and say, hey, I'm here, but I represent 30 people from your district. And that's some power right there. That shows organization. I don't know. I'm at sue.swenson@gmail.com. I don't often give out my email on public forums, but this is my heart. If I can do something for you, send me a note. If you think I'm full of whatever, send me a note. I'm willing to listen to anything. I am not a public official currently. My job at Inclusion International is a volunteer job. I was elected to the role, and I'm really proud of that. I'm the first president of inclusion from the United States in many decades. But if I can do anything for you or connect you with somebody, I don't know very much. I am not a PhD. I am not an expert, but I've been there and I know a whole bunch of people. So if there's something I can do to help, please let me know. I would like to try. Please look at the websites that I mentioned. And oh, I should mention too, Inclusion International is working on our World Congress, which will be happening in September in Sharjah in the UAE, speaking of expensive travel. But if you have a desire or an ability to, again, do a GoFundMe or meet with families from all over the world and see how similar our problems are to theirs, it doesn't matter what country you're in, we're all going through the same stuff. That is empowering in many ways. And it's empowering to recognize and to meet people who are doing the fundamental democracy work and how powerful it is and what a difference it makes. If you go to Inclusion International's website, you can look for the World Congress and find out about it and find out what our presentations are. They're all organized around the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. But we recently developed guidelines for how to include people with intellectual disabilities in meetings and decision-making processes, and it's called listenincluderespect.com. We run all of our meetings using Listen, Include, Respect guidelines. So it is eye-opening to see what a democratic process looks like when it is fully accessible to people with intellectual disabilities. So that's what I got. I don't see any questions.
Sue, you are just amazing. I've been writing all these different notes, and yeah, as far as finding our courage, gathering our justice, I want to go back and listen to the replay so I can capture that quote.
Look up J.B. Pritzker's State of the States in Illinois, State of the State 25.
Cool.
It's long, and a lot of it doesn't apply to all of us, but the ending is really important because he's talking about the Nazi and the neo-Nazi movement and how it impacts Illinois. It's really profound.
And Roseanne is with us, and she's from Illinois, so she recognized that also. So that was helpful. Yeah, and I love that you mentioned partners and policymaking, and I know Anne Marie mentioned it also in the comments, and that's an opportunity for you that does not cost parents anything,
a
right?
whole bunch of comments. I'm sorry, I didn't see
Oh,
the.
no, yeah, people are just absorbing everything you have to say. But yeah, as far as partners, that's an excellent place, right? Where
I see Heidi's comment. Does a system exist to see real-time data and communication? Yes, it does exist. And if you send me an email, I will be happy to forward it to you. And I tried to get money to develop it when I was in OSERS in the Obama administration, and I couldn't do it. But that doesn't mean it isn't still out there. Evolve in Effect, here's another group of people that you should really know about if you're not following them on a regular basis. If they're doing any workshops in your state and you're missing it, you are really missing out. That's
Michael McSheehan. We love
yes,
you. We
brilliant.
love you from New Hampshire.
Yep.
And yeah, so
I know he's been with you before, Charmaine, and he's just great. So
I know it's so I am compiling a list of the links that Sue shared with us today. And I'll be posting those on this Facebook page. So come back here, and this is a free Facebook page. And I'll have that list ready for you probably by tomorrow. But yeah, I think that what you have shared with us is, like I predicted, it's thought stimulating. It helps us look and see where are the basic foundations of our humanity that
I can be wrong about a whole bunch of stuff. I really can be. But I'm pretty sure I'm right about the stuff I said here, even the stuff that you're not going to hear in any public forum. Nobody at the DPS is going to talk to you about Musk the way I did, but I do think he's a flying monkey, and I think he's a villain, and I think Trump is a villain also. And Trump may just be a useful villain. I have friends in Russia, so I know what's happening there too. And there's Olga, please send me an email and I will talk to you about the data system.
Yeah. And if you want to give that to me, Sue, also, if you want to email it to me, and then I can put that in the list.
Yep. I can tell you right now, it's their app. And it's used in Medicaid. It's not used in education as far as I know, but it's HIPAA compliant, so it would be FERPA compliant. and I think it's therapp.net. I don't have any relationship with them anymore. I used to. I want to be clear about that, but that was more than 10 years ago. It's a system, and if you look at it, you'll be able to see how it's used in Medicaid to keep everybody informed about what's happening with each person who's receiving services.
Great. Yeah, and what is always so amazing is like the people from around the country that are here. And so I appreciate so many people are saying they're going to be sharing this with their school district, with their PTS. So yeah, those grassroots efforts.
I see that Renee has mentioned the DD Day in Tallahassee. I've been there for that.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm glad you're
Oh,
a Partners in Policymaking graduate. I had the pleasure of teaching in Florida many years ago, but the DD councils are a big part of the disability policy seminar. So if you tell them that you're interested in going, they might be able to help you out to get going there. I'm
yes.
so glad to see so many people here and helping to support each other and finding ways to move forward. And this is where your strength is going to come from. It's all of the other people who are in the same boat. We're all in the same boat.
Yes, and I hope parents will know and take away that your voice matters. And even more importantly, your child's voice matters.
Yes.
So I love the ideas that you shared, Sue, about working with more self advocates and disability activists and looking at how we can bring their voice in more. And I also love the advice for us to stay connected, not only with our national, but our state legislators, because if money does flow down as a block grant, your state Department of Ed and your home state is going to be making decisions on how that money is spent.
And they're going to be, like, shall we say, eligible for a boatload of litigation. They don't want that. I can't tell you, every time we put out a regulation when I was in OSERS, states would get back to us and say, thank you so much for this clarity. We really needed it. It is not an overregulated law. There aren't a lot of things that are just extraneous. And remember, ADA applies to children also.
That's true. And that when ESSA, right? There are
Yep.
other laws that apply to every child because your child is a general education student first. Yes, those rights are there.
And if you want to know about the rest of the world, look at the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. There has been a great deal, as general comment number 4 on the right to inclusive education, the right to education for children. UNESCO is doing a whole bunch of work on the right to education around the world. And it's not a bad thing to understand where the rest of the world is. American exceptionalism, sometimes we think we're the only ones struggling with this, and we're the only ones trying, and everybody's trying.
So,
exactly. It's good to know about that too.
And Jim, I don't know if Jim Sue, but he says, thank
Hi, Jim.
We all need to hear straight talk. Great stuff from the heart and experience.
You're kind, Jim, as always.
Thank you. So, Sue, I want to honor your time, and I just am feeling blessed that you are in the world and that you are sharing your expertise and your insights with us and encouraging parents and others to stand strong, because these are moments when we do need to widen our circle of allies, and as a collective group we can be change agents. And this is an opportunity for us to look at how would we, in the perfect world, how would we want our education system to look like, and to make sure that it doesn't become a system that only serves people who can't afford to go to a private school or have a voucher to go to a private school. Because, this is a pretty serious crossroad that we're at. And we know it's not just the education system in our country. There are so many other things that are getting impacted.
Mm.
And I just hope that the people that are on here today, that we can stay connected and we can start coalitions, right? I mean, you look at the parent power that first created movement for our children. It was parents sitting
Even if
next
you're an
to
introvert, you can invite one person to have coffee with you. And then there you can build from there. And you can find out what each other's skills are and build on those. And that's where organizations come from. I want to express my gratitude, two things. One, to you, Charmaine, for putting this together and for the work that you continue to do on the art of advocacy and moving all of the ideas forward. It's really important. And two, to all the people who logged on today and who are logging on to the replay, because that's what you're showing me is, hey, I want to make a difference. I need to figure this out. And that's the key to everything. That's the start. You can't do anything without that. Good for you. Good for you.
Yes, yes. Thank you to everyone. And yeah, this is a time that we can we can speak up and speak out. And also to know that there's going to be a time where you need to give yourself grace and rest. And that's when somebody else, your neighbor, your best friend, your husband, whatever, is going to help and speak up. But yeah, know that there are times where you need to rest and take care of yourself and your
When that
family.
happens, it's magic. When that
Right.
happens, don't worry, Sue. We know you missed the last meeting, but we brought up all of your key points.
Huh.
That's like a gift from the gods. And you don't have to be rude like I am. You don't have to be going out there and making accusations about who's evil. You can just be constructive, and that's fine because you're in the system. Your children are in the system. It's not going to do any good for you to go start any fires. I'm old and I'm not in the system anymore, and I get to say whatever I want.
I love it. And that's why I knew that you would be the perfect guest today.
Thank
And
you.
yes, I want to stay in touch with you more and continue this charge that we have to create that.
Good luck to all of you.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So thank you, Sue. And for people that are new to the show, it used to be like every week, but now it's pretty much twice a week. I do a live show here on the Art of Advocacy. And this was definitely the show that I wanted you to hear today because Sue Swenson is a person I learn from, and I want you to also be in touch
Thank
with.
you. You're kind.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Sue.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.